Bonjour, kuna disnakas, bejudo dem, pegwas and dunjaba. My name is Kona. That's my spirit name as well. It's a Cree word for snow. I am a Anishinaabe member of the Peguis First Nation and a Lynx clan member. I have a Cree name, and the name that I have is Snow. It was given to me at birth in Cree territory. My reserve Peguis is in Cree territory. Originally, Peguis was actually a chief that came from Sault Ste. Marie trying to escape the settlers that were invading our lands a little bit more than 200 years ago. And that's not a very long period of time, 200 years ago. And I think a lot of this mainstream society seems to forget how fast technology has moved forward and changed humanity. You know, we're talking about human rights this week. And you just look around yourselves right now. How many of my people do you see in this room? Take a moment, take a look around. How many of you identify as Indigenous to this territory? Take a look around. This is a sacred time of the year for my people. September 23rd is the equinox. Right now, I know for a fact there's a lot of ceremony going on the land for the last 4 days, today being the last day. So quite a lot of the people are actually out on the land. And that land base, that's why I bring it up. We don't have a land base, yet this is our land. Without a land base, a community cannot make a living, cannot have economic development. Our land bases were taken from us in treaty. I was given tobacco to come be here today. This tobacco, traditionally, prior to contact, was a sacred medicine that came from the Iroquois people in the eastern direction of this turtle island of North America. The turtle island is what they call North America, because in our Indigenous teachings, underneath Turtle Island is literally a turtle. And our ancient teachings of all the continents, we were all one people at some point in some time. Those ancient teachings are there. And Turtle Island people are here. We're the stewards of this land. We're the caretakers globally of this land. So this tobacco I hold in my hand, I make prayers for all people, for all nations globally, because it's a great time of change now. Our ancient peoples knew this. The Mayan calendar was only one calendar that ended last year, or was it 2 years ago already? You see, time goes by fast, doesn't it? But there are other calendars, ancient calendars, that ended the same time. And that's because it's a new age. A new era, a new change, a new awareness of people recognizing our connection to humanity and who we are as human beings, of caring and loving people that we all are. But these land masses, these land bases separated us, and that's where that forgotten knowledge happened. And all these divisions began and created. I'm going to sing an honor song to open this evening. And the song that came to me while I was sitting here is my own personal healing song. 1996 is when this song came to me. I went to a healing retreat, and it was part 2. The Aboriginal Healing Foundation was part of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples' recommendations to help my people. Had a short mandate, mind you, of a few years of heal and get well and move on. Create your own foundation for your own healing afterwards. They're working on it. But I remember when that foundation was started, and I was able to take a week-long Healing Your Inner Child workshop. And it was all Aboriginal people. It was all Native people that were in that healing space together. We had 7 healers and elders that helped us, 25 of us, for a whole week. Every morning we got there, they gave us breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and we literally had healing happening to us in dark rooms, and lots of crying, and lots of stories being shared. And then 6 months later, we had this retreat. And I was so thrilled because we got to go out on the land this time. We got to go away for a weekend out in the middle of winter. And I was so excited because I got to go out on the land and away from my family, for that matter. I was all by myself. So I get there, and they set us up, and there was all these non-native people there. And I hadn't quite healed yet. I still had a lot of hurt. And I found out that there was these other people that got to come and be part of our healing weekend that weren't native. But they got to take this healing too, because they're allowed to take the healing because it's public funds that paid for them to take the healing. So it didn't matter what nation they were. They got to come and join us. I had to swallow that because I got matched up with this little short blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman as my buddy for the weekend to help me through my healing. I was angry. I was so angry. So I took what Creator gave me, which was my drum, and it was middle winter, and there was a lake about 200 meters off of the deck of the cottage that we were at. So I start trekking out there with my drum. From here to that wall, I sunk right into the snow up to my hips, but I kept going to that lake. And I got there about 200 meters from that deck, and I just sat there and I cried and cried, and that's when I heard the song. And I took it as my healing and reconciliation song, because it helped me to come to terms with recognizing that I was hurt. My people have been hurt. My father was hurt. He was a residential school student. And there's generations of us that have been hurt. But if I didn't stand up then and there that weekend and accept that blue-eyed woman looking at me, wanting to help me, there wouldn't be any hope for the rest of us either. That we need to accept help when it's offered, no matter who it is that's there. Because Creator puts us in front of each other for a reason. That's one of the biggest teachings I've always been given. Is that there is a reason for absolutely everything that happens. The big difference is your choice. Are you going to move forward with it? Or are you going to walk away from it? So that weekend I chose to hear that song and carry that song with me. And I'll share it here with you today. So I'll bring back that idea of land base. Like I said, my name's Kona. It means snow in Cree. Peguis was relocated in 1907 to Cree territory near Fisher River. I was raised by a Cree woman, my stepmother, Nora Cochran. They weren't affected by the residential schools the same way. The people in Fisher River knew when they were coming for their children and they took them hunting. So very few families in Fisher River have been affected by residential schools, and yet they've been colonized the same way. They retain their language and a lot of their culture, a great deal, but the dysfunctions of colonization still exist within that community, not nearly to the degree that it is in my community of Peguis. Peguis is one of the largest reserves in Manitoba, a whole 72 square miles in swamp. It's a swamp. I have 165 acres that used to be farmable, but it's a swamp. These things are changing now. The treaties are starting to be honored. We're looking at human rights this week. Does anybody know if Indian reservations have human rights? April 2012, Canada gave that wonderful Canadian Charter of Human Rights, was finally accepted on reserve, April 2012. Up until April 2012, Indigenous people in this country on reserves had no human rights. That's why we were protest. That's why you see us always gathering and rallying. We had no redress. We had no way to complain or to get people to hear us. Things are changing, things are shifting, and I give thanks to Charlene for giving me this opportunity to share what little I know, because I've given you a very tiny fraction of the reality that my people live in this country. Take some time to share what little I've shared with you, and look it up. There's lots of things changing. Read the treaties, read the Indian Act. It's not even an act. It was a theft. It's genocide. Miigwech.
That's Kona Cochran. Thank you, Kona. It's beautiful to hear you sing. Thank you. The structure of the evening is our opportunity to hear intersecting many kinds of voices that are part of the community here. And the person I'd like to invite up next is Brenda Hasiak, who is a wonderful writer who only sort of comes to the surface every once in a while. And she's actually got 2 new books this fall, which is an exciting time for any writer. She's a young adult novel called Your Constant Star, and a collection of short stories called Boy Lost in the Wild. Please welcome Brenda Hasiak.
You can blame my children for the long span between my last book and these 2. Totally worth it, but that's right. Can you hear me? Okay. Good? Okay. I'm going to read you about the last hours of a woman who's lived longer than most of us ever will. And who remembers some of the history that Kona was talking about. She's searching for something that she can't quite name in her distant past. She was a girl on a pioneer farm, a maid in River Heights, and a naive young lover during the dying days of the Winnipeg General Strike. She's searching for something, but her healthcare aide keeps dragging her back to the moment at hand. You take the teacup from my hand. You not talking to me today? You not watching your shows? Not now, I want to say. This is too important. I want to know what happened to Saul. His tongue is tickling my neck, my cheek, my ear, while he whispers. There's only the pain and his tongue and the whispers. So good, so good. And it's all so close and so awful and so good that I can hardly stand it. Please, I want to say, I don't want it to stop. So awful and so good, not for the Jews or for the Ukrainians or for justice. I am Tilly, a hard-working stonemason's wife for 50 years. But what about Saul? I was sleeping, and then he was gone. My chest feels heavy, like he's still lying on top of me. I put a peppermint under my tongue, but it doesn't help. Every breath comes long and hard. You, I want to say, standing there playing with the cross around your neck, you wouldn't understand. It's not good to be old and to never have believed enough. I could never believe enough in the Virgin, never believe enough in justice. My young ones have moved far away from here, have foyers of their own, but no matter what, no matter how long I'm on this earth, I know these streets here still smell like the poor. I know you wear my mama's cross, but you still smell strange and fishy, and I can't pronounce your name. I know those shows on television with beginning, middle, and end. They're not real. I know I'll never know what happened to Saul. I didn't care to ask where he lived as long as he came to me. You don't eat, you don't talk, you don't watch the TV. You're going to at least have a bath, huh? A nice bath. A boy was crying, I say, outside when I was outside. You walk away, shout above the rush of water in the tub. Why you keep on about that? You don't worry about that. They said a nice policeman came to help him. What are you doing out that late? That's what I want to know. Why they let their kids wander out so late? I remember it's the Indians who live here now. It was an Indian boy who was crying, maybe 6 years old, hugging himself in his t-shirt. He was standing near the glass doors that open onto the dark lane. The doors slid open just like that. The overhead light popped on, and the boy appeared at the mouth of the lane, crying. I don't know which way, he shouted. The snot was running into his mouth. I got the cherry ones, but I don't know which way now. When I stepped out, the steamy air was like a blanket, and I almost fell down in surprise. How long had it been since the air wrapped around me like that? With his blue-black hair, he almost disappeared into the dark. What's your name? I asked. But he wasn't listening. I don't know which way, he shouted. Then your little brown hands were pulling me back into the safe, cold room. But you didn't know that the words were already there. Never got found, never got found, never got found. I'm walking in snow so deep that it's filling my boots. I can feel the cold metal of the shovel through my mittens, and the cow and the oxen are somewhere behind me, making low noises in the dark. I hate this. Oh, how I hate it. But Momo is coughing, and Johnny is coughing, and the others are too little. Though I want it to be done, I stop because the snow in my boots is melting against my legs. There are lots and lots of stars, but no fireflies. There are fireflies only in the summer, but why is that? Why can't there be some in the winter too, when it's so dark and you have to go out so early and your legs sting so bad? Never got found, never got found, never got found. I'm walking again through the deep snow, thinking of Papo's story. You remember this, he would say. You remember the little one, little Mary, from not far from here. It was spring planting, and this is true, because I worked the lines with her step-uncle, and he wasn't a liar. She left her work and went off to pick some wildflowers, and at sundown, her people couldn't find her. 3 days go by, and all they find is an Indian camp somewhere close, and then some people start seeing a bunch of them with a little white girl, but they never got found. Then Papa would get the big jar from behind the flour sack and pour some into a cup. He'd drink it in one big gulp, and his face would turn bright red. You could feel the heat just standing next to him. "You see," he'd say, "you work hard, or the Indians, they'll snatch you away, and you'll go to live in the teepees." I hang the light on a wooden post. Then I hold the shovel far out in front of me and bring it down with all my might. Crack goes the ice. Never got found goes my head. Crack goes the ice. Never got found goes my head. Slush goes the ice. Never got found goes my head. There is a small hole with black water inside. I step back, and then there's nothing but the sound of the animals lapping and grunting. They could still come, I think. I'm alone, and they could come. They could come and steal me away to live in the forest, to wander with pots and babies on my back, to sit high on a horse and laugh at nothing. The animals are finished drinking, but I stay put. I am lost, 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 but I am not afraid. "I can't feel my legs," I say. But I must have said it out loud because now you're over me, poking me. Upset. "You all right? You breathing all right? I can call an ambulance. We go back to the hospital." "Leave me be," I want to shout, like the boy had shouted. "Leave me be. I'm with the wild Indians who have swept me up into the tall poplars to laugh at nothing. I'm with curly-haired Saul who whispers so good and makes me bleed until my bulky body falls away, and there's nothing but that feeling so deep inside, painful and fine. I'm lost, 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 where there is no Tatya or Tilly or stupid cows that need a drink. But you poke and fidget, poke and fidget. You look at me like my young ones do, trying to understand what I don't understand myself. I didn't mean to upset you." "No," I say. "I'm fine. I want a bath." You run to turn off the water, and then your small hands are on me. They're small, those hands, but when you help me up, I'm always surprised by their strength. "You sure you're ready?" "Yes."
I don't have jokes, but I have poems. 10 years ago, I published a book called The Counter's Appetite. That's a literal translation, which could be bettered, I guess. And in it, there's a series of poems that have for a title translated, "Winnipeg is not a city of poems, you know." And I wanted to prove that it was. And the whole series of poems are dedicated to some Winnipeg poets that have made this city also a city of poems. So I'll read two poems from that series. The first one is called, in French, 6 semaines en 1919. In English, 6 weeks in 1919. Au début, il y eut la guerre, les départs, les tranchées, la boue, la vraie de vraie, la der des der, comme on disait, scandalisé par l'horreur si facile du gaz, des tanks, de la gangrène dans le moment optimiste de la Société des Nations. Pendant la guerre, on a vu rouge en Russie, on a pris peur ailleurs. Carte de la ville en main, à la poursuite des rues, je refais le parcours des événements, quelques semaines de mai et de juin, assez de temps pour voir naître et mourir une grève générale au précédent épars dont Jack London aurait été fier et triste, car c'est le même talon de fer qui a écrasé cette exception canadienne, une aberration sociale dans la fissure du siècle. J'ai vu les photos des camions de distribution de lait autorisés par le comité de grève, des ouvriers et des cols blancs sortis en colère et en liesse des bureaux et des manufactures, ayant cessé de croire qu'ils n'avaient que la vie qu'ils pouvaient acheter, cherchant dans la rue à refaire leur présent, à se donner une voix commune pour haranguer les hommes au ventre plein qui contrôlaient les échanges et le travail des autres. J'ai vu les photos des policiers grévistes remplacés par une milice privée, du tramway renversé, des paroles incendiaires, des charges à cheval commandées par des mains apeurées, par tout ce qui leur échappait. Il a fallu des arrestations et un mort en juin pour assurer leur retour au profit, sans réussir toutefois à coudre les lèvres des rêves tenaces. The second poem basically says that Winnipeg is also a city of theater, theatrical events in their wider sense. Costumer la ville, to costume the city. Elle se sent légère dans ses mocassins fondateurs. Elle joue la jeune première sur un sol ancien. Elle s'invente des lieux d'histoire grandiose. Elle étend son passé récent sur la géologie. Elle goûte à fond ses cérémonies commémoratives. Elle célèbre ses anciens combattants des guerres oubliées. Elle gonfle sa vigueur pour les nouveaux arrivants. Elle arrive sans cesse à un point tournant. Elle proclame annuellement des moments définitifs. Elle rêve d'une image sur l'écran du statut mondial. Elle s'organise des fêtes pépères dans les rues. Elle bâtit ses décors en néo-n'importe quoi. Elle aime entendre le vent qui glisse sur ses immeubles. Elle jette des coups d'œil inquiets dans les coulisses de la vie. Winnipeg est bien une ville de théâtre. And I'm going to read also a couple of poems from a series that was published in Soubresaut, the poetry book I published last year. And this time it's about the world of work, which is not a very popular topic when you read poetry. But I worked from 1979 to 1984 in a big factory called Motor Coach Industries, where we built buses, Greyhound buses. And it took me 25 years to find the tone and the way to talk about it. So it's a series of poems called Industrial Relations. And it's dedicated to a few poets that I know that have talked about the world of work, including Milton Acorn, Émile Coder, Philip Levine, Dorothy Livesey, Thomas McGrath, and Tom Wayman, a few American and Canadian poets. Number one. Un matin sombre de fin d'automne, le soleil avait refusé de se lever. David s'est traîné jusqu'à l'usine, saoul, à pisser son mauvais vin, sa bouche sombre en colère contre tout. Peter et Andy l'évitèrent comme d'habitude et j'ai refusé de travailler avec lui. Avec l'autorité d'un petit boss, Nick lui proposa d'occuper son temps tout seul, espérant qu'il se crucifie comme le Jésus portugais qu'il n'était pas, avec sa perceuse au plancher d'aluminium de la soute à bagages de Patty Loveless, chanteuse préférée de Fritz, dont les tournées en autobus parcouraient les routes d'Amérique pour entretenir la mélancolie. Mon contremaître allemand aimait boire la musique country, mais n'appréciait pas son superviseur à chronomètre de rendement, fantôme des toilettes qui a mesuré nos absences pendant quelques semaines de garderie. Ancien soldat de la Wehrmacht, pratiquement illettré en anglais, promu sans doute parce qu'il le fallait, Fritz endurait mes idées d'extrême gauche. Je ne critiquais pas sa musique, savais lire les formulaires, écrire en anglais. Je le dépannais, il me dictait ses rapports, j'étais discret. And the last one of the series, number 5, dans l'atelier des presses à métal, 5 ans suffisaient pour perdre un morceau de doigt, une main. Dans l'atelier de montage des autobus, il fallait un instant d'inattention pour qu'un châssis tombe ou frappe. Dans l'atelier de peinture, il fallait plusieurs années pour encrasser poumons, cerveau et cœur. Dans l'entrepôt, les maux de dos brisaient la force de l'âge. On mourait parfois pour gagner sa vie. Merci.
It's an honor to be here, here at the Forks on Treaty 1 territory. And one of the things that I'm hoping you have a chance to do is to go and look at the monument to murdered and missing women that is just south of the Oodena Circle. And you might also know that a dedicated group of people have been dragging the Red River in hopes of finding loved ones and bringing some kind of closure. So you can find them as well over the next few weeks at Alexander Docks. I've learned so much from the coalition of families of murdered and missing women. They have shown me how to keep searching in the face of denial, indifference, and discouragement. Please find a way to support their efforts. Tonight I'm reading from my Queer Western, Quivering Land, which I see as a poetic meditation on trauma, violence, and the possibilities of art. I walk the line, the horizon line. Drifting along, tumbling tumbleweed. Violet reaches to turn off the TV, but she doesn't. Instead, she turns down the volume, watches the stagecoach hustle and bump through Monument Valley. Chased by men on horses with arrows flying, guns firing back at them, dust and death everywhere. She hauls her body off the couch, back to the workbench at the center of her studio. She stands there, contemplating the dead, recalling each gun and bullet, each body falling heavy to the ground. She's been seized tight by the story, held captive by the heroic Western tale. Old stories of cowboys and Indians, dusty towns, loaded guns, and the jagged pink landscape of Monument Valley. She wanders over to the small fridge and pours a glass of cool, clear water into her silver cup. Johnny Guitar sings the ballad of Little Joe while riding through the desert on a buckboard. A dead man, searching and pale, rides the high plains, drifting, drifting. Now she's drifting, like a tumbleweed blown across the land, scattering seeds in her room. She returns to the TV, finds John Wayne there on the screen, towering. He's the tallest man by far, as tall as the rock formations in the desert of Monument Valley. Now the Duke, John Wayne, leans into the doorframe of a settler's house, leans into her studio. What is this threshold between a wooden house and an open sky? Outside the wilderness, the frontier, is where it's said that a new life might begin again. Violet returns her gaze. She has watched this scene with John Wayne over and over again and tries to remember the ending before it happens again. Does he walk away for good? Her memory sense tells her this is a substantial gesture. Before she can fully recall, she watches him turn, walk away into the wind, door left wide open, the outside spilling in. How the door frame shapes everything, enclosing meaning, as if meaning might be contained with straight lines. What does it mean to deviate from the line drawn out for you, the line you're supposed to follow? What does it mean to follow the line? Is the horizon a straight line? The lines, these rigid frames, have held the broken treaties, massacres, land by fraud, land by force, women by force, the army, missionaries, relocations, hangings of the warriors who fought back. Land drawn on the land. Lines drawn on the land. The happened is still happening. She wants to slam it right away, right away, right away. Standing at the threshold, she watches him ride away, looks into the space he left. The land was not empty, the soil not virgin. Is there a home or a sunset to ride into? There is a sun, it still sets. Each and every bullet. Standing on the edge of the horizon, a young girl takes each and every bullet into her heart, catching the odd stray with her tiny teeth. Not as dark as ripened cherry, darker than crisp red apple, richer than throat of red gladiola, more vibrant than blazing sunset, the color of fresh blood. Her dress dirty? Yes. Her dress bloodied? Yes. If you asked the girl, she would say her dress wasn't always this way. In front of her is the town, ablaze with gunfire. Behind her, Monument Valley, giant stones reaching into the sky. So the text of Quivering Land follows Violet, who's an artist who's stuck in her studio thinking about Westerns, and also Clem, who's stuck in a Hollywood Western. They're haunted also by a dead girl who's riding through Monument Valley. Some of you might be familiar with that landscape. The sun setting. Violet walks into the valley of pink rocks, west. She is riding into the west. There is a sun, it still sets. She is thinking about the constant shift of color, the deep sensation of warmth in the light. She stops, turns her face to the sun setting. She leans into stone, releases her full weight. She can feel the ridges running along the width of her back, sun and stone warming her. She rests here, gathering pieces of herself with each breath. Gust of wind howls across the expanse, picking up dust. Quiet calm returns. A condor glides by, Sharp, piercing hiss, its shadow passing over her. She slides her palms across the rock, feeling the stone she is up against. Her fingers find tiny, smooth holes of different sizes and shapes. She turns to face the rock. It is a towering sculpture with the shining presence of a full moon rising as the sun sets. Massive stone sheets piled up on top of one another. Some of the stones stand slant, almost upright. Others lie flat. Streaks of uranium fall from the sides. Stones stacked from the ground into the sky, haphazard, precise. Violet examines the vibrant surface. Color shimmers from shades of pink to red to orange. Embedded in the stone are flecks of sparkle. Some of the edges of the stone are sharp, some jagged, some smooth. The structure is riddled with holes, as if bullets ripped right through the rock, and then over time, wind, rain, sun, animals warm the sharp edges into smooth, unusual shapes. The holes grew larger, some big enough to put her fist through, her heart, her shoulder, her entire body. A large irregular hole opens into a particularly queer hollow. Violet steps inside. It is quivering, this stone, this land, with her touch. Thank you.
How to live up to that? So for this reading, when I was asked, I wanted to do something new, and so a couple of weeks ago, I actually went out to Oodena in the dark. And since we didn't get to do that tonight, if you're able to, I would strongly encourage you to go out there and stand right in the middle of it and look straight up, because it really is quite something. And hopefully, when you look up and think about the story I'm about to tell you, it will scare the hell out of you. So, it was here at Oodena that I first saw the Wendigo. It wasn't called Oodena then, I guess, but this is the place. My Uncle Baron and I had been walking for weeks, and we made camp in a wide clearing right near here, in sight of the frozen rivers. He always insisted on setting the fire away from the trees for fear of setting the whole forest ablaze. This left us vulnerable prey to the worst bite of the winds. It was only by some miracle that our tiny flames didn't blow out. The gusts were so strong we couldn't get the tent up that first night. We huddled together, pressing so close to the fire that I singed my gloves and the cuffs of my pants. Overhead, the bright glimmer of the stars put the firelight to shame. Uncle Baron was slumped heavy on my shoulder, asleep. I could hear his soft snoring over the roar of the wind. Mostly I looked at the sky. But sometime well into the darkest part of the night, something at the edge of the tree line caught my eye. I noticed the antlers first, standing out against the thick trunks and broken branches. Then the rising mist of breath. I thought a stag must have come out from deeper in the forest, drawn by the smell of warmth, and then froze when it noticed my uncle and me. But this thing was watching us, and it wasn't spooked the way a deer would be. And the antlers were too far off the ground. The base must have been 8 or 9 feet up. I've never seen a buck that big. I stared a long time, squinting through the dim flames, and I saw it blink. Maybe I just sensed it, or maybe it was all in my head. Then it snuffed a great burst of steam and reared even taller as it turned and slunk back into the trees. I just sat that way until daybreak, and I never told Uncle Baron what I saw. This was the winter I would have turned 13. Going with my uncle on his 2-month trek into the bush to clear out his traps and then meet the fur traders out on the frozen plains was the biggest adventure I had ever had. We took turns pushing a small sledge filled about halfway with food and extra coats and blankets, snowshoes, a tent, his rifle, with room to spare for all the furs and pelts that we'd be collecting. The first few nights I could barely stay awake long enough to set up camp. Uncle Baron took my plate out of my hands where I sat asleep at the fire and led me into the tent atop the nettles and boughs which we'd made into beds. But soon I adjusted to the rhythm, and I loved the feeling of calm and quiet outside in the winter night, alone under the cold light of the stars. I took to staying up by myself until the fire died down to nothing, really seeing the stars for the first time in my life. Before that, I'd never thought about what it means to look up at those distant fires which have been burning for longer than anything else this world has ever known. So far away that all the space on the earth, thousands of times over, couldn't reach them. I look up at those points of light where once there was only dark, and think of all the great stories and of the important part we're supposed to play. I realize that no matter what I do or whatever happens to me or to any other person or to thousands and thousands of people, those stars will be there just the same, unaffected. The universe doesn't care at all what happens to us out here in the wilderness, and I'm strangely comfortable with that idea. The days we spent walking were long and drawn out, so Uncle Barron passed the time by talking, usually rambling mutterings about no one topic in particular. One afternoon, as we struggled with deeper snow, he half turned to face me, and in between heavy inhalations, he asked, "Have you ever heard of the Wendigo?" I was breathing too hard to answer, but he continued anyway. The Wendigo is a being of hunger. It eats those it finds starving and lost out in the winter wilds. A cannibal. He stopped altogether and raised his eyebrows for effect. See, a Wendigo is turned. It starts out as a person, out in the cold with no food around except for other people. But all you need to turn into a Wendigo is to know that it exists. It's an idea, he said, a dangerous one. He started walking again, but slowly, turning often to see how I was reacting. The story belongs to the different tribes around here, the local people, but they never speak of it. The Wendigo has horns like a stag and stands many times taller than a man because whenever it eats, it grows taller, thinner. It stretches out even more so that it's always gaunt and emaciated, forever starving, never satiated. He was quiet for a long time, letting it sink in, I suppose. "Your dad never told you that one?" he asked me. We walked much the same way for weeks, but never found any furs, never saw any game or fowl. All of Barron's traps had been cleaned out, some surrounded by great gouts and smears of blood atop the snow. By the time we reached the fork of the two rivers, we were out of food. And though Barron was sure we were at the right place, we saw no traders, no settlements, no tents or fires, no living thing at all. The only other thing I saw was the Wendigo. Uncle Barron never did. Time came unstuck here. Some days the sunlight only seemed to last for an hour or two. Then the nights would drag on forever, and we'd burn through whole piles of branches that we had managed to cobble together through the little bit of daylight we had. We burned the fire in the same place every night, and soon it had melted deep into the thick-packed snow, so that we had to climb down into a shallow pit to sit near the flames. While my uncle slept, I watched the slow approach of the Wendigo. In the dark, it came closer and closer, though never right up to the fire. The antlers reached up so high, a cradle for the stars overhead. Its meandering near the fire, covered with thick, coarse fur, but its belly was bare. The flesh turned a sickly black, like a frostbitten nose about to fall off. It walked slow laps around the clearing, meandering near the fire, and then eventually receding back into the cover of the trees. And I left the fire to follow it, walking behind, moving beside its tracks so that I wouldn't disturb them. But in the mornings, though I would wake up atop the snow a good way from the tent, or right at the edge of the tree line, I could never find my own tracks again, only the wide, deep imprints that the Wendigo had left. I never pointed them out to Uncle Barron, because I didn't know how he might react. As time went on, he refused to even come outside the tent. And still no people. We boiled our shoelaces and the ties from our packs and snowshoes into a thick, gummy paste, and we tried to eat that. We gobbled handfuls of snow to stop the growls of our bellies. During the day, things started to look blurry, but at night, the stars, they were just the same, magnificent. As the hunger grew worse, all I could think of was eating. I rambled on about food until Uncle Barron screamed at me to stop. I thought about eating the snow all the way down to the grass and then eating every blade. I imagined what it would be like to eat the trees, the whole forest, to reach high enough to eat the clouds. I could feel myself growing tall and gaunt, and I loomed over my weakened uncle, my elongated shadow crowned with a wide swath of antlers, and in that vision, I ate up all the world. That was a long time ago, it seems. Much has changed, but all that really matters is just the same. People all over the world gaunt and hungry, eating up all there is, stretched thinner over all the lands. Before long, if this keeps up, there might only be people. I wonder if the Wendigo could grow so tall that the only thing left to eat would be itself. After that, everything might be quiet and still. Only the cold and the wind and the snow, and of course the stars. Lights overhead just as before, while everything below returns to the dark. I'd really like that. Thanks.
Thank you, Charlene. Thank you to Thin Air for inviting me today. This piece is about being South African and moving to Canada and a few of the conflicts that exist there. My grandparents' house is too small, on too much land that does not grow much and bleeds when turned. The corn and kale that struggle from its soils is fine, though. It feeds 13 children for twice as many years, and their children when they stagger backwards from the world beaten down. There's a truck whose bed we throw mango seeds onto from my grandparents' back porch, exactly where the seeds cannot grow, only dry and rot in the sun. The uncle who can make it go went with his mouth open, screaming in a language my teachers wouldn't let me speak. I rebuild my mouth to look like everyone else's, faster and less foreign, and standing flat-footed, I rebuild myself from snow, trying desperately to push against the dirt I was made from. I am black because I come from the earth's inside, and I am trying to relearn the way I draw my breath until I can pretend I'm not gasping. There are trees which we climb and throw fruit from to our older siblings who eat it all before we reach the ground. Someone else climbs one to tie a rope to a branch which my grandfather cuts down and my grandmother cries over in the kitchen. My father says, laughing, that Ashinabe sounds African and wonders if the hunger growing in Chief Teresa's Spence has the same desperate hands that those 300 angry prisoners in 1989 Johannesburg clenched into tired fists. Why should it be different? What is different? There is so much about the news that is too familiar to him and not familiar enough to me and my sisters, who mostly use the newspaper to clean dirt off of our mirrors. My grandfather writes a poem for his firstborn grandchild and one for me of inconsequential number because he wakes up crying the day I am born. He writes this in a letter and folds the poem into it, and my mother lets it yellow in a borrowed winter coat. It snows the day we arrive. This country yelled frantic for our freedom and embraced us full-bodied with its own children squirming underfoot, as though its own Indian Act was no blueprint for apartheid, as though its bloodied hands were not guiding the ones that harmed us. And in homeroom, I ignore these bullshit policies and mealy-mouthed apologies, these things I do not know and I'm never taught to sing of this true north, of strength and of freedom. When my mother stops watching the news, she says it's because it makes her heart hurt and her teeth ache, and nothing about how it is easier to smile around the water cooler and sleep at night. And all of a sudden, we are the silent faces who turned up the Afrikaans radio and ignored the screaming from the streets. Suddenly, we are turning two blind eyes and pretending they are blue. Suddenly, we are speaking English at the dinner table and not at all about how much the struggle looks like my uncle's open mouth, all teeth and forbidden. It's tiring to care this long, to know in your gut and between your shoulders that you are standing on guard for hypocrisy, and I do not want this political body. I want to be blank slate, to be default, unmarked, but my skin sings a protest song, and my gut clenches constantly for each new form of fist. I miss the bliss of ignorance, of the cool of closed eyes. I wake exhausted, tired from the labor of loving myself, misremembering the sun all summer in a day. I am planting roots in land that is not mine and does not want me, and finding only rock. My parents build a house, and it's too big on too little land they never use. They do not plant corn or kale afraid that anything we bite into will fill our mouths with blood, and not even our own. And there is too much red already in our silent mouths. Thank you.